Now,
Yeah.
on more global issues, on the 1st of January 2020, a new global cap by the International Maritime Organization on sulfur content in marine fuels came into effect. This meant that ships could only burn fuel with a sulfur content of 0.5% or less. In
Yeah.
Western Europe and the eastern and western coast of North America, they are considered emissions control areas, or shortly, ECA zones, with a stricter 0.1% sulfur content limit. This was all in a bid to curb the contribution to human ill health and reducing environmental degradation caused by shipping emissions. In turn, this was also part of a larger goal by the shipping community to slash in half greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement to slow down the process of climate change, or at least the human contribution to it. In July as well, this year, the container sector became the leading scrubber-fitted cargo carrying sector in terms of DWT and or TEU. Tell us about the strides made by the liner business towards a greener shipping.
All right. So, as you quite rightly said, effective 1st January this year, 2020, the IMO 2020 regulations came into effect, which regulates the cargo or sulfur emissions. So from 2019 back, we're looking at sulfur emissions of 3.5,
Sure.
and 3.5%, and the IMO said we need to get these down. There were already ECAs, or emission zones, as you quite rightly said, which had a cost to them in order to try and mitigate the emissions in those areas. But this was a much larger scale uh, uh, solution. So we saw, for instance, for carriers introducing BRC, or bunker recovery charge,
Sure.
as early as 2019 in order to build finance in order to fit scrubbers and also change to alternative fuels which emit less emissions. So we were able to do that. We've changed fuel to lesser fuel, or fuel containing lesser emissions. Also, we are in the process of fitting scrubbers to our vessels. Now, scrubbers, for the benefit of those who don't know what they are filters, basically filters for vessels, and also stabilizing agents, stabilizing mechanisms in order, to burn less fuel, so thereby, emitting less emissions into the atmosphere. So we have all of these, initiatives to try and be compliant. Of course, it is inconvenient, because, as you can imagine, some carriers which operate in excess of 500 vessels,
Mhm.
and they have to be fitted for scrubbers, and they have to change fuels from the conventional heavy fuel to the new fuel that does not have as much emissions. So you can imagine that these are huge costs, hence the introduction of these surcharges. Also, they created a bit of a problem with scheduling. As you can imagine, uh, for each scrubber to be fitted to a vessel, that vessel has to be taken out of the service,
Sure.
um, taken to either Singapore or wherever else they fit the scrubbers, and then be reintroduced into the schedule. So there was a bit of disruption as far as scheduling and vessel rotations are concerned, but it's something that has to be done. We are also seeing, technological advances with the like of CGM, which in 2017 ordered LNG, or liquefied natural gas powered vessels, which will come online very, very soon. So these are huge vessels. They're about 23,000 TEU capacity vessels. So it's a huge operation, and we applaud the forward thinking of CMA. We hope that the other carriers will follow suit, of course, but of course they have to weigh it up against the charges or the costs, and of course the practicality of it, because some services call ports which are not as technologically advanced as some Europe ports. So there's the question of whether they'll be able to service or to provide or supply LNG to such huge vessels. So there's a give and take, but in general, there has been a move, looks from the carriers to be more efficient, more energy efficient. I recall a few years ago, some carriers having an idea to introduce sails, your sailing vessel, introducing sails to commercial vessels in order to cut down on fuel usage. So there's been all these ideas, but of course, there's cost versus practicality and disruption. So they have to weigh all of those things up. So yeah, those are the technological or green enhancements that have happened to the industry.
No, quite. Look, with this whole scrubber technology that is being fitted onto ships, I really hope, because there have been concerns from environmentalists and certain people who are making really valid points, that what you're actually doing with the scrubber is that you're taking the pollution from the air and dumping it into the ocean. So I really hope, as the fleet renews, because during the early 2000s, more especially in the container business, we had a new fleet, a fleet renewal, new ships being built to meet the demand after the downturn of the economy. I hope, as those vessels now are aging, that the new vessels that are going to be coming into service are ones that are going to not need this scrubber technology because of this downside about it, but really are going to be using technology that will in itself not cause adverse impact in its aim to mitigate against environmental damage.
Absolutely. Now, let's hope so. There's always, I know some carriers have R&D, research and development departments specifically dedicated to seeing whether, what can be done in order to mitigate, whether speeding up vessels or slowing down in order to save bunkers, emissions, etc., etc. So there's a huge drive in order to accomplish that, from the carriers. So we hope that, as you say, they will be able to, with their design of their new vessels, have all of these things built in order for them, for the environment to be, safer or spared, in the process.
Quite. Now onto markets. According to BIMCO and according to Clarkson's research, the order book is now the new ship order book is sitting at anything between 6 to 9% of the fleet. If you compare this to the 2008 stat, where it stood at 60 to 70% of the fleet. Now, Zooks, from your own assessment, do you think there is less optimism about a V-shaped recovery in the medium term? Or is the sentiment that there won't be a new demand that would require additional vessels?
I think it's a trade-off. If you notice, the class of vessel being ordered now is huge capacity. For instance, the MSC, Gulam, the Maersk new vessels, they're all huge capacity, 20,000 up, 20,000 TEU up. So I do not believe, although the vessel number is low, I do think that it's also a trade-off, because, in the early 2000s, they were designing, vessels in the 8,000, 10,000 TEU region, versus now we are post 20,000. So I don't think necessarily it's because of a lack of optimism on the prospect of the future in terms of cargo movement, but I think it's just that the vessels are so big that there's no point in having a huge amount of vessels, whereas we can service the capacity
Sure.
with a fewer bigger vessels. So I think that's the reasoning behind it.
No, quite. Some have said that freight rates have defied gravity, staying relatively high in all the various liner segments. What have you noticed in the main east to west and north south routes? Have freights come under pressure? And also, what have you seen happening with demolitions? Have they been significant, or are the owners hanging on to their floating assets?
So well, when I came into the industry, it must have been around 2010. The liner shipping industry, we had freight rates in the region of $2,500.
Sure.
And to the east, and now we are sitting at around $500, $600. So they've certainly not defied gravity. They have come down significantly compared to then. But it's a new day. So we have seen freight rates coming under pressure, particularly to the east and from the east, to the extent that imports, for instance, into South Africa, the validity is no longer than 2 or 3 weeks because of the volatility of the market.
Sure.
They change so often. They're susceptible to change so often that we cannot have validities longer than 3 weeks. So that should tell you that freight rates indeed are susceptible to the conditions, economic conditions, and demand and supply factors. So it's definitely not the case. What's currently happening from the East in particular is that because of the opening economies, the US, the Europe, coming out of the COVID restrictions, we're seeing a huge spike in demand in terms of capacity and also equipment. So that is in effect driving prices up, because of course it's a cost on carriers to reposition reposition empty containers rather to those regions in order to service exports. So we are seeing a lot of fluctuation in the rates in the right direction.
Sure.
Because they've been low for quite some time. So yeah, that's the current assessment. In terms of the vessels, we are seeing owners hanging on to their floating assets, as you quite rightly said, because it could be because of high scrap prices, and also because if the
low
vessel
scrap prices.
Yes, sorry. So it could be that the if the vessels are running well, if they're not giving hassles, that there's not really a need to take it out of commission. So we're seeing a lot of that nowadays. Also, the order book, as you quite rightly said, we're ordering less containers, but less vessels, but of bigger capacity. So yeah, it's trade-offs. It's trade-offs. Look, we don't want to create a situation where there's an oversupply of tonnage, because that will in turn drive the freight rates down, because we'll all be chasing the same cargo, and we don't want a situation where there's a huge oversupply of tonnage in the market.
No, quite. Well, I think on that note, on that optimistic note, we'll end it there. Zooks, thank you very much for joining us again and sharing your views and insights with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
Quite. To you joining us from wherever you are, at home or wherever you may be, thank you for your time. Please share your thoughts and comments on the comments section at the bottom. We would like to hear your thoughts. Thank you again. Be safe and goodbye.